Thank you. We will now move on to the final item of business. So could I ask those members leaving the chamber to please do so quickly and quietly. And the final item of business this evening is a members' business debate on motion 15634 in the name of Lorna Slater on a safe, accessible and sustainable Holyrood Park for the 21st century. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak button, and I call on Lorna Slater to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to those members who've stayed late today to participate in this debate. Holyrood Park is a really special place. From when I first arrived and used to hike up Arthur's Seat twice a week as a way to get some free regular exercise, through COVID, when a weekly circuit of the park was a chance to have a safely distanced chat with a friend, and including those periodic fits of cardiovascular ambition that seize me every few years when I decide I'm going to train up to run all the way around the park, and now having it on my doorstep every day at work. Holyrood Park is intertwined with 20 years of my life in Edinburgh, and this is true for tens of thousands of people. Holyrood Park is the specific and direct responsibility of Scottish ministers. The legislation that applies to the park was set out in 1971. Scottish ministers have delegated responsibility for looking after the park to Historic Environment Scotland, HES. Holyrood Park is a complicated place. The whole park is designated as a scheduled monument. It is covered by a SSSI, 2 of the features of which were in unfavourable condition when they were last assessed in 2007 and 2013, and one of which hasn't been assessed since 2001. It is used by athletes, families, commuters, dog walkers, cyclists and birdwatchers. It is a rat run for city traffic. It hosts events, millions of tourists, and even a few MSPs and parliamentary staff for their lunchtime exercise. Certainly, Liam Kerr.
Liam Kerr.
The intervention. Just on that point she made about the park being used as a rat run, does the member have any data on what the reasons are that motor vehicles are using the park and how the users in those motor vehicles break down?
Lorna Slater.
I don't have that information, but the member is quite right. That's information that we need to have. What is clear, though, is that the park is being used as a through route by people travelling not to the park to enjoy it, but through the park as a way of presumably avoiding Edinburgh traffic. There are 2 themes to my speech today, on which I hope to hear from other members and from the Minister. The first is about improvements that can and should be made to the park as soon as possible to improve the experience and safety of park users and visitors. The second is a plea to Scottish ministers to put in place the intention and resources to implement a long-term plan for the park. This includes sufficient human and financial resources to undertake the further work proposed in the Holyrood Park Strategic Plan in a timely and effective manner. I think this work must include an update to the primary legislation concerning the park, and I think it should consider whether care of the park should be placed with a dedicated local organisation with the remit and resources to take care of it properly. I'll come back to this point. On immediate and pressing matters in the park, I was grateful to the 150 local residents who joined me at a community meeting on Monday evening this week to set out their concerns and priorities for the park. Thank you to Sarah Boyack for coming along to this as well as several Edinburgh City councillors. One person who attended that meeting said to me, "It's the first time someone has asked me what I think." I will write up the feedback more formally for Historic Environment Scotland, but at the meeting, the top priorities were suggestions to improve nature in the park and to improve active travel. There were many people calling for cars to be slowed down, traffic to be reduced, or for cars to be banned altogether, except for disabled access. There was an enthusiasm to support activities in the park, everything from football to boating, marathon running to dog walking and cycling. Whilst many were concerned about the tension between visitor numbers and activities and their effects on wildlife and nature. There were repeated requests for pedestrian crossings, dropped curbs, improved signage, and other measures for safety and accessibility. There was a widely held desire for better public transport to and within the park, with connections to the city and Lothians. These are all very sensible and reasonable concerns. All of these matters will require consultation and they will require funding. Will the Scottish Government resource this project properly, especially to quickly establish a credible business plan for the park so that work can get started? The most loudly voiced concern at Monday's meeting was about the restrictions currently in place on Radical Road and how they are in conflict with the Scottish people's right to roam. This brings me to my second point. Is the legislation covering the park fit for purpose? And is Historic Environment Scotland the right organisation to be managing it? Is it right that the entire park is a scheduled monument, putting it out of sync with right to roam, and with how a public park might reasonably be expected to operate? The HES employees and rangers whom I have met are truly excellent professionals, and I commend their work. But I fear that they have an impossible job. They are stretched much too thin and do not have the resources needed to tackle Holyrood Park's challenges properly. We don't know how many people exactly visit Holyrood Park in a year, but estimates are in the millions, maybe even 5 million. Compare that to Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park, who host about 4 million visitors a year and have an annual budget from the Scottish Government of £13.9 million, or Cairngorms National Park, who host 2 million visitors with a budget of £8 million. I wasn't able to find information on exactly how much HES spends on Holyrood Park in a year, but with £74 million from the Scottish Government, they have to manage over 300 properties. That averages out as less than £250,000 per property. The strategic plan for Holyrood Park mentions 21 HES employees who support the park, but those same 21 also look after other properties in Scotland. Compare that to a staff of 110 for the Cairngorms National Park, or 137 at Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park. Reimagining Holyrood Park is a massive and complex project. Scheduled monuments, triple SIs, a busy commuter route and a tourist venue, starting from a state of eroded paths and very damaged nature. The slow response to issues on Radical Road and the delays to publishing the strategic plan, however welcome, give the impression that HES is hopelessly under-resourced to take on this work. Holyrood Park, with its millions of visitors, the complexity of its landscape and variety of users, needs resources and democratic governance much more comparable to those of a national park. We have an opportunity to reimagine Holyrood Park, and I hope that the Scottish Government will step up to the challenge. I look forward to hearing from other members this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Leaser. I now call Ben McPherson to be followed by Liam Kerr. Mr McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and pay tribute to Lorna Slater for bringing this motion and subject area to the Parliament for debate. I have a long attachment with Holyrood Park myself. My best pal used to live on Royal Park Terrace when I was very, very young, and going into Holyrood Park was an almost weekly occurrence. And anyone from Edinburgh who's grown up here or moved here and feels attached to the city has a connection to this park. You know, the skyline of Arthur's Seat is something that moves us, inspires us, and unites us on a daily and yearly basis. And of course, Holyrood Park is connected to Leith, which I represent, and is used by many Leithers and part of that northeastern part of our capital city. And I note the proposals and the strategic plan, and I've really taken a lot out of looking through it. I didn't support the motion because I feel like I need to examine this situation a bit more carefully. I think a lot of the recommendations in the strategic plan around Radical Road, around Rockfall, around the improvement of the public paths are all really powerful and issues to pursue. I think the issue that's perhaps more contentious and more difficult to balance is that which has already been commented on by other members, which is the traffic question about how do we, one, make sure that we improve opportunities for active travel, while on the other hand, enabling people to connect across our capital city. And, you know, I've spoken in the Parliament before about a campaign my father was involved in to stop the inner ring road being built through Edinburgh, which would have decimated parts of Edinburgh, including the Cabinet Secretary's constituency and mine in particular. But since that period, I think we've really struggled in the capital city to get the balance of connectivity right between pedestrianising and increasing opportunities for active travel, while also having effective motor vehicle routes that enable efficient transport through the city. Part of this is because we clogged up the bypass, which has caused a lot of issues. Anyway, I'm digressing, but my point is that for people travelling from the centre to the east, that avenue through Holyrood Park is quite an important way through for drivers, particularly when Salamander Street in my constituency is so congested. So areas to consider, and I think it's really good that we've got this opportunity now to talk about it. I just also wanted to say that I think Lorna Slater is right to highlight the regulations from 1971, and actually it connects to a broader point which is pertinent to other parks in our capital city, and their regulation being primary legislation. So the City of Edinburgh District Council Confirmation Council Order Confirmation Act 1991 is also relevant in this question, which, for good reason, prevents certain development in a number of parks, including Prince Street Gardens, but also Leith Links. And for me as a representative, whether it's Leith Athletic Football Club wanting to upgrade their changing rooms, whether it's the ambitions that there are to have a skate park in Leith Links, things that other organisations have wanted to do in the past, like Street Soccer Scotland, all of their proposals, if it was new buildings on Leith Links, would require a piece of primary legislation through this Parliament. And indeed, the last time that this was done was in 2014, so that John Rattery statue, who invented the rules of golf, could be erected on Leith Links. You know, if we're going to do a piece of primary legislation that's about Holyrood Park, I think we might want to broaden it to see if there's some modernisation that's required for actually how do we regulate development and change in parks across Edinburgh as a whole. Because I think whether it's Holyrood Park, Leith Links, Princess Street Gardens, there's improvements that we could and want to make. But we probably don't want to have a position where we require an Act of Parliament each time that happens. So there's a question of delegation to the local authority, as long as they don't come up with an idea again to build an inner ring road. So, thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms McPherson. I call Liam Kerr to be followed by Sarah Boyatt. Mr Kerr.
Yeah, thank you, Presiding Officer, and I congratulate Lorna Slater on bringing this debate. I grew up in Edinburgh and I spent a great deal of time in this park, so I recognise the statements expressed in her motion. There's no doubt that the wide open spaces, the stunning scenery and the beautiful wildlife provide an oasis of calm in the midst of busy city life, or when commuting. When I used to stay over in Newington, I had the pleasure of cycling in and often saw MSPs and staff running through the park. So I think it's right, I think Lorna Slater's right, that we seek to protect and nurture the park, and I also welcome the strategic plan. I also welcome the members' call to strive to achieve a park which is safe, accessible and sustainable, benefiting nature, people and heritage. Where I am disappointed, however, is the throwaway mention in the final line of the motion that these aims would be furthered by ending motor traffic in the park, because Lorna Slater failed in her remarks to justify that proposition evidentially, although she commendably conceded that there's a massive lack of data throughout in this area. Instead, I think this comes across as a solution in search of a problem, because she's given us no data on pollution, which I think is a pity, because there could have been an interesting exercise around the negative and unintended consequences of Edinburgh's draconian LEZ moving traffic around. I'll take the intervention.
Ken McPherson.
Thank Liam Kerr for taking the intervention. Would he agree with me also that we need to consider that a lot of people drive to Holyrood Park to then walk around it, and also at the moment there is a lack of connectivity in terms of bus routes that we only have one bus that stops in the right place for people to access the park.
Liam Kerr.
I think this is a really important point, which is actually something I intend to return to because it is so important. Because that lack of data that the member conceded, Lorna Slater conceded, that we don't have about why people are using the park is going to be very relevant, because it goes towards we don't have data on accidents. Statistics. We don't have data on what the users of the park will think. Now, I concede that Lorna Slater talked about a meeting in which she said local residents were present who gave their important views, but the users and the local residents are not necessarily the same people. And going back to Ben McPherson's point, Lorna Slater conceded that we don't have data on why people are driving in the park, or who they are, how they break down. And absent that data, I need to make similar assertions, such as since the road through the park serves as a convenient and scenic route connecting the city centre of Edinburgh with areas like Duddingston Village, if cars are banned, presumably residents will be required to take a lengthy detour to reach places like Meadowbank, Abbey Hill, city centre and Leith Walk, and that wastes time and creates unnecessary extra traffic, both stationary and moving, and that increases pollution in areas where the urban environment will prevent its dissipation. So that data on traffic destinations through the park, I think, would be very welcome. But secondly, my colleague Jeremy Balfour tells me that banning cars will significantly hinder disabled people and those with mobility issues from being able to enjoy the park. For those people, a car is not a luxury. It's the only way they can get about. Now, Jeremy Balfour made the point to me that such a ban tells disabled people, and these are his words, mind, that they are not allowed to enjoy the same access to this beautiful space as those who don't struggle with mobility. Will I have time, President?
Yes, briefly, Ms Slater.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the member taking an intervention. I was very clear in my speech that the requests from people at the community meeting were to ban cars except where needed for disabled access. And Car Free Holyrood are campaigning to stop a through route of cars, not stopping people driving to the park in order to then enjoy the park. I want to be clear on that point.
Liam Kerr.
I take the point, but of course Car Free Holyrood describes itself on the very first line of its website as a group of local residents. And that goes to my point that actually this is about a much wider group. Their views are, of course, extremely important, but we have to look at who the users are, and we don't have data on that. And on which note, I thought it was interesting that we got this briefing from Ramblers Scotland, which said that 2/3 of people responding to the consultation which led to the strategy we're looking at mentioned difficulty accessing routes and areas of the park, and that's not going to be solved by closing the road. So, Presiding Officer, I think it's a pity that Lorna Slater has put in an unevidenced and some might say ideological demand for closure in what is an otherwise very reasonable motion, because it comes across as ill-thought-through prejudice which potentially has negative consequences for many park users. So, like Lorna Slater, I do welcome the strategic plan and I hope it achieves its vision, promoting a safe, accessible and sustainable park. But I do hope her vendetta against private motor vehicles, both in the park and more widely, is consigned to history. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I call Sarah Boyack to be followed by Mark Ruskell. Ms Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also want to congratulate Lorna Slater for securing this debate, because the importance of this park is to people, to nature and heritage, and it's absolutely vital. As others have said, it has incredible views across the city, and the park itself is an important resource for people, for exercise and looking to explore the nature, the heritage and also the geology of the park. I also want to thank Lorna Slater for holding the consultation that she did on Monday this week to continue the discussions that have now been ongoing, I have to say, for years in the area about the future of the park, how visitor experiences can be improved and the challenges that need to be addressed. And it isn't the first time communities have been consulted. Last December, we had an excellent meeting hosted by the Edinburgh Geological Society, Ramblers Scotland, the Coburn Association, Mountaineering Scotland and Scotways. The focus at that meeting was about the urgent need to reopen the Radical Road, a vital part of the park's history, which has now been closed for years. And there were strong arguments put forward to call on Historic Environment Scotland to invest in making the park safe and enabling access to for people to access not just the incredible views from the Radical Road, but to be able to access and explore the geology of the park. And one of the points that was made quite forcibly on Monday's meeting was that nothing had happened since that meeting. So there's a bit of a frustration because people do get consulted, but there's a sense that we need more action. Another point that I thought was really important that was made on Monday was the need for an inclusive approach to involve local schools more in the park as a superb resource and enable education to actually benefit from giving young people access to the park, and that we maybe could do with better signposting to enable people to maximise the benefits of visiting the park, understanding its nature, heritage and geology. And tourism opportunities were also raised, and that's been raised on regular occasions. Historic Environment Scotland themselves suggest in their park strategy that the park raises £1.8 billion a year in income generated, which is a huge amount of money and a big part not just of Edinburgh's tourism offer, but I think Scotland's tourism offer. So there's a huge amount that we can be proud of, but some key issues such as the legislation needing to be updated that's been mentioned by several members already. And I'm looking forward to hearing the final analysis of Monday's meeting. The points that Ben Macpherson made summarised the challenges, I think, in terms of maximising walking, cycling, ensuring access for people with disabilities. That's been made round the room today as well, but also the issue of traffic, which is both controversial but it's really important to get right, because the issue of banning traffic has been raised on numerous occasions over the years, but it's also hotly debated by local residents. I have to declare an interest as a local resident. I won't say exactly where, you can probably work it out, because I cycle through the park on an extremely regular basis. So, like the constituents have written into me, I see regularly HGVs, commercial vehicles, which are not allowed to drive through the park. But there's no monitoring. There's no enforcement of that rule that does not allow HGVs and commercial vehicles. And I think it adds to the numbers of vehicles going through the park, and it actually creates a sense of unsafety, particularly when it's big vehicles passing each other, because the road was not designed for that. So I think we need a more joined-up approach. And I'll also say, as a former town planner, I think we need a bit more of a strategic approach. As Ben Macpherson has mentioned, we need better public transport. Since the meeting we had last year in December, the number 12 bus now runs on a Sunday and further into the evening, but it doesn't really meet the needs of people in the area. So we need a strategic approach, we need an enforcement approach, and one issue that's been raised several times is the issue about financial support for Historic Environment Scotland. Their staff have to do a huge amount of work, and there's an issue about the nature of what we need to get fixed in the park. I mean, if I just look at the Northfield the Northfield and Willowbrae Community Council submission to the Historic Environment Scotland consultation, they have some very practical changes and improvements that could be made to walking and cycling in the park that could be done now, that don't need to take a decade. Also, access steps up to St Leonard's. Some really
Ms Boyle, you will need to bring your remarks to a close, please.
Okay, thank you very much. The key thing, I think, we've had lots of debates before. We need action. I hope the Cabinet Secretary will pick up on those points about funding, legislation, a strategic approach with the Council to work on those traffic solutions, so that if we come back in 6 months, we might have a group that works to support the park.
Thank you very much.
And we will need to move on.
Forward. I'm conscious we have the carol service commencing at 6 p.m, and I'm really conscious that we don't want to do anything that would delay the carol service in the Parliament this evening, to which many, many visitors are coming along, travelling, hopefully by public transport as well, in a cold evening. So thank you. I call Mark Ruskell to be followed by Ash Regan.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I thank Lorna Slater for bringing forward this debate? I think, 2 decades since we've opened this building, I think this is probably the first debate about Holyrood Park, which is surprising because, of course, the park and the Parliament are so intertwined together. And the park, of course, has inspired generations of people who live and work and play around it. And it has a huge cultural significance. So Walter Scott wrote these words many years ago about the park. When a piece of scenery so beautiful yet so varied, so exciting in its intricacy yet so sublime, is lighted up by the tints of morning or of evening and displays all that variety of shadowy depths exchanged with partial brilliancy, the effect approaches near to enchantment. And that's the view from the windows of our Parliament here today. It is enchanting. We see the ever-changing light on the crags that marks the passage of the days and marks the passage of the seasons. Now, recently I've become reacquainted with the park. I'm on a bit of a health kick. I've started trying to run around the park in the early mornings around Queen's Drive. And it is astonishing in the early morning, the numbers of people that are out there running and walking and cycling and wheeling. It's so well used. And as I puff my way up Queen's Drive under the crags, I am struck, though, every morning during rush hour about how polluted that particular stretch of road is. And what I do see is a number of cars going past that are clearly non-compliant with a low emission zone. And as I'm running along, I do feel my chest start to tighten. I don't have the data that Liam Kerr perhaps wants, but I do have that sense of the fumes and the particulates affecting my lungs. And as a member of this Parliament's cross-party group on lung health and an air quality champion in this Parliament, I am concerned about my health. I am concerned about the health of people also running through the park at that time. And I would simply say to many of the members in the Lothians and local councillors as well, is it appropriate that a park like this in a World Heritage Site sees 8.5 million car trips pass through it every single year? I don't think it is. I think there needs to be a better balance here. And if you go to other... not sure if there's time, President.
There's not additional time, but it's up to the member.
I would like to continue, sorry, but if you go to other global cities that have got iconic parks such as New York, Central Park, yes, they have traffic restrictions in place. Yes, they have speed enforcements. I think the aspiration of a car-free Holyrood is a good one. It's disappointing not to see more consideration of what kind of restrictions and limitations can be put forward in the strategic plan. But as I think about my run in the mornings, I continue up the hill, past Dunsappy Loch, and other things strike me as well. There's a lack of interpretation for visitors. And, given the extent of the archaeology, the geology, the history, the protected sites that we have for nature in the park, there's a story to be told there, and it's disappointing not to see more interpretation. I also see the footpaths on Arthur's Seat that are pretty wrecked, and it's not surprising given the huge number of visitors that enjoy the park every year. But there is a need for investment there. There is a need for the strategy to consider these things. And finally, as I head back to Holyrood, I pass the gates that are currently restricting access to the Radical Road that have been in place, I think, since 2018. They're clearly out of place. We clearly need to see the Radical Road reopened. And I would like to see a clear timetable coming from HES in the new year. I do think, Minister, that Historic Environment Scotland have taken a very risk-averse approach. We've seen that with the high-level masonry programme that has partially closed many attractions across Scotland. And I do think that with a public path that is prone to rockfalls, there's learning from elsewhere, learning from our national cycle network about how to manage those risks. I think HES could learn from Sustrans about how to open up the Radical Road and do it in a responsible way. So it's good to see that commitment in the strategy. Presiding Officer, I'd like to thank Lorna Slater again, and I look forward to seeing the improvements to come, hopefully, in my morning run in the years ahead.
Thank you, Mr Ruskell. And I call Ash Regan. Ms Regan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'd also like to add my thanks to Lorna Slater for bringing this debate to the Chamber this evening. I am obviously the constituency member for Holyrood Park, and I'm very passionate about us and the future of this iconic space being used well for all of us in our capital city. But I would also point out, as others have done, that it is a key link, a key route through the city centre for my Edinburgh Eastern constituents. So I think is something that we need to take into account when we're having this debate. Since the consultation last year, I have to say I have been inundated with constituent concerns about the perceived threat to this key commuter and business access route. So I think we need to ensure that there is certainty that Holyrood Park will continue to be an asset to the people who live here, who do business here, and also those who want to come and visit. Through thoughtful planning, consultation and practical measures, I believe that the coexistence of road users, walkers and cyclists in Holyrood Park can be balanced. I think we have seen that this has managed to be done in other areas. Major cities like Copenhagen have proven that practical and not ideological solutions drive that meaningful environmental improvement by promoting the coexistence of residents, businesses and tourists. And I visited there last year. I was lucky to do so, and I got that very sense that this is a city that seemed to value all of its citizens, whether they were pedestrians, whether they were cyclists, or indeed whether they were car drivers. If I just spend a moment to highlight a couple of constituent comments that came into me through my email. One constituent wrote to me and he said, the consultation openly avoids asking the question on road closure and is flawed. It is designed to draw responses on nature, health, history and all the benefits the park holds, but is designed to show these are incompatible with vehicle access. This is not the case, and both can coexist, especially as it closes to cars at weekends when commuting reduces. End quotation. Another constituent said, I am growing very frustrated by road closures in the park, taking away my ability to drive up there whenever I would like to enjoy the views as I have done since I was a child. End quotation. So to ensure that community buy-in, we have to promote community involvement. I think Liam Kerr made this point when he said we have to listen to residents right across the city and take their views into account. We need to engage with residents, including my constituents who use the park and the road system in the park, as well as those cycling organisations, walking organisations, to ensure that we get a decision-making process that works for everyone. A traffic survey that was done in September 2021 obviously took place when many people were still working from home after the pandemic. I don't think that's then indicative of the solution for road access in 2024 and beyond, now that people are being encouraged back into the city centre to work, to shop and to enjoy hospitality. If I have time, Presiding Officer?
There's not additional time. It's up to the member.
I don't think I have time. I'm very sorry. There are many ways to enhance environmental sustainability by promoting walking, cycling and using electric vehicles where necessary. But I really feel we have to take this on board. People are absolutely fed up of being dictated to when it impacts their ability to live and work in their own city. I think we really need to take that point on board. And we've got to work with residents and businesses, not against them, to ensure that the future of Holyrood Park creates that balanced coexistence where all the users of the park feel valued in Scotland's capital city.
Thank you, Ms Regan. And I now call on Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson to respond to the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. And I'd like to close the debate today by thanking Lorna Slater for tabling this motion, and I recognise and welcome her ongoing engagement on this important issue and her interest in the future management of Holyrood Park, the northwest of which is in my Edinburgh Central constituency. As we've heard today from the various testimonials from esteemed colleagues across the Chamber, Holyrood Park means many things to many people. It's a place to connect with each other, our nature and our history. It's a place to inspire us, to spark both physical activity and creative energies. And it's a place to educate us, to demonstrate the powerful volcanic geology beneath our feet and, sadly, to show us the impacts of climate change. It's important that the balance of elements which makes Holyrood Park so special is maintained. The many combinations of meaning which people experience during their visits add depth and complexity for the management of the park. These management responsibilities, which as Holyrood Park is a property in care, are handled by Historic Environment Scotland on behalf of Scottish ministers. And as discussed earlier, has published the strategic plan for Holyrood Park in September 2024. This strategic plan clearly defines the purpose of the park in terms of positive impacts on health, well-being, climate and economic factors, and also in terms of community connection, shared history and both local and national identity. It also recognises Holyrood Park is an important element of the tourism offer for Edinburgh. The park, containing a mountain in the city, provides a unique and outstanding visitor experience that enables tourists and residents alike to connect with nature and their shared history right in the heart of the capital. It will never be an easy task to manage such a popular central site, especially one which has the wealth of designations already present in Holyrood Park. From sites of special scientific interest, listed buildings, conservation areas, World Heritage Site, to scheduled monument protections, there is significant legislation in place to ensure that such a unique site is being managed appropriately. These regulations and designations are carefully followed by Historic Environment Scotland, whilst they endeavour to deliver an accessible and diverse asset for the people of Scotland. Any suggested changes to the legislative protections for the park will, of course, be considered in due course and following due process and collaboration. And I encourage colleagues who have such an informed interest, please, to share their views with me and the Government, as I will then share with Historic Environment Scotland, who are meeting in early next year. Very, very briefly.
Sarah Boyack.
Very much welcome that offer, and if the Cabinet Secretary could particularly raise the issue of HGVs and commercial vehicles, that would be superb.
Cabinet Secretary.
I will be happy to do that, and anything else that the colleagues would wish me to raise, I'm happy to give that assurance. As I stated earlier, the park means many different things to people, and as such it's important to note that the strategic plan was not crafted in isolation, then enforced on an unsuspecting park users. Historic Environment Scotland conducted extensive face-to-face public and stakeholder engagement, as well as running an online citizen space public survey and consultation, which took place over 12 weeks from September to December 2023. This work gathered just under 5,000 returns, and no doubt some of the members present today were included in those returns. These returns were then analysed, and the resulting consultation report was published in September 2024 and can be found on the Historic Environment Scotland website. By carefully examining these varying views, Historic Environment Scotland has been able to use an evidence-based approach to consider how the park is currently used, about perceived issues and priorities for the park, and how park users see the role of the park in the context of Edinburgh both now and in the future. As we've heard, an area that raises convergent views is the traffic management within the park area. I'm fully aware that there are still issues to be addressed for the park, and the strategic plan does not include a final movement strategy for the park. This is currently being developed by Historic Environment Scotland in collaboration with the City of Edinburgh Council and will align to their City Mobility Plan 2030. Additionally, detailed surveys will be required to inform the plans for future traffic movement and active travel to ensure a sustainable future for the park. I'm pleased that Historic Environment Scotland is engaging with both local authority and Police of Scotland to consider the implications of future proposals, as well as ensuring further research and development with park users and residents. In consideration of the traffic management in the park, Historic Environment Scotland are looking at ways to make it easier and safer for people of all ages and abilities to choose healthier and happier travel options that will allow them to continue to access and enjoy this high-quality public space. Similarly, access to geological features within the park should also be permitted where it's safe to do so, and I know that there is a very real risk posed by rockfall, especially around the Radical Road and Samson's Ribs. This risk to the health and safety of park users, rangers and contractors needs to be carefully assessed and managed to ensure that Historic Environment Scotland is able to meet its legal responsibilities for public safety. And while I appreciate that there can be frustration at such measures, it is paramount that the highest priority is given to the health and the safety of all park users and workers. In summary, while there are still areas of ongoing work, overall, the creation and implementation of the strategic plan is welcome, as is the ongoing community involvement and consultation. Historic Environment Scotland continue to navigate the delicate balance of connection between our communities, our natural world and our history. I'd like to take this opportunity to extend my special thanks to the small team of Historic Environment Scotland Rangers and Parks ground staff who do such excellent work covering the on-the-ground services for everyone who enjoys using the park. To finish, Presiding Officer, I'd like to reiterate my thanks to Lorna Slater for her interest in Holyrood Park, as well as to Historic Environment Scotland for encouraging park users to share their views and help shape the future of the park. I'm so pleased to see that Holyrood Park continues to offer such rich opportunities for our local community, our understanding of history and our experience of nature right here in the heart of our capital city.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, and thank you, members, for your cooperation in terms of the time limitations this evening. And that concludes the debate, and I close this meeting.